Chicago, and today I will be reading Part 2, Chapter 5 of Bonjour Tristesse by Françoise Sagan. The incident that I have just described was to have its consequences. Like all those who react to things in a very considered way and are very sure of themselves, Anne could not bear to compromise over her principles. That gesture of hers, the gentle way in which she had released her firm hand from around my face, was for her just such a compromise. She had guessed something that she could have made me confess to, and at the last minute she had given in to pity or retreated into aloofness. For it was just as hard for her to take charge of me and knock me into shape as it was for her to accept my shortcomings. It was her sense of duty that prompted her to assume the role of guardian and teacher. In marrying my father, she was at the same time becoming responsible for me. I would have preferred her constant disapproval, if I may call it that, to have been the result of her irritation or of some other feeling that went only skin deep, because in that case habit would quickly have gotten the better of it. People get used to the faults of others when they don't believe it is their duty to correct them. Within 6 months, she would no longer have felt anything but weariness where I was concerned, and affectionate weariness. That is exactly what I would have wanted. But she wasn't going to feel that way because she would see herself as being responsible for me, and in a sense she would indeed be responsible for me, since fundamentally I was still pliable yet headstrong. So she was annoyed with herself and she let me know it. A few days later at lunch, and still on the topic of the holiday revision that I found so intolerable, an argument erupted. I was rather too outspoken, even my father took offense at it, and in the end Anne locked me in my room, all without having raised her voice. I was unaware of what she had done, and, feeling thirsty, I went over to the door and made to open it. When it wouldn't open, I realized it was locked. I had never been locked up before in my life, and I was genuinely panic-stricken. I rushed to the window, but there was no getting out that way. I turned back, truly horrified, and threw myself against the door, hurting my shoulder badly in the process. I tried to force the lock, clenching my teeth, as I didn't want to call for anyone to come up and open it for me. I sacrificed my nail clippers in the attempt. So there I was, standing in the middle of the room with nothing to show for my pains. I stood perfectly still, conscious of a sense of peace and tranquility coming over me as my thoughts became clearer. It was my introduction to cruelty. The idea of it took root in me and became stronger the more I thought. I lay down on my bed and carefully drew up a plan. My ferocity was so much out of proportion to what had given rise to it that I got up 2 or 3 times in the course of the afternoon to leave the room and was each time astonished to come up against the locked door. At 6 o'clock, my father came to open the door for me. I got up automatically when he entered the room. He looked at me without a word, and I smiled at him in the same automatic way. "Do you want us to have a talk?" he asked. "What about?" I said. "You hate that kind of thing, and so do I. That way of having things out that leads nowhere." "That's true." He seemed relieved. "You must be nice to Anne. You must be patient." That word surprised me. Me? Patient with Anne? He was standing the problem on its head. The fact was that he thought of Anne as a woman he was imposing on his daughter rather than the other way around. There was all still to play for. "I've been very unpleasant," I said. "I'm going to apologize to Anne." "You are, happy, aren't you?" "Yes, of course," I said lightly. "And then if we don't get on too well with Anne, I shall just get married a bit sooner, that's all." I knew he was bound to be hurt by that suggestion. "That was not anything we want to consider. You're not Snow White. Could you bear to leave me so soon? We would have only had 2 years together." The idea was as unbearable to me as it was to him. I could easily have seen myself there and then, weeping on his shoulder and talking about lost happiness and high-flown emotions. But I could not make him party to my plans. I'm really exaggerating, you know. Anne and I get on well, in fact. And with allowances on both sides... "Yes, of course," he said. He must have been thinking, as I was, that the allowances were unlikely to be reciprocal but would be made by me alone. "You understand," I said. "I am well aware that Anne is always right. Her life is much more of a success than ours, much more meaningful." He made as if to protest in spite of himself, but I carried on. "In a month or 2 I'll have taken Anne's ideas completely on board. There will be no more silly arguments between us. It just needs a little patience." He was looking at me, clearly baffled, and he was also fearful. He was losing an accomplice for his future escapades, and he was also losing a bit of his past. You mustn't exaggerate, he said feebly. I admit that kind of life you've led with me was perhaps not suitable for your age, nor, for mine either, but it wasn't a foolish or unhappy life. It really wasn't. Basically, we haven't been too, miserable. We really haven't, or out of kilter these last 2 years. We don't have to disown our way of life just like that, merely because Anne looks at things rather differently. We don't have to disown it, I said with conviction, but we do have to abandon it. So it seems, said the poor man, and with that we went downstairs. I made my apologies to Anne without any trouble. She said that they were unnecessary and that the heat must have been to blame for our argument. I felt indifferent towards her and perfectly cheerful. I met up with Cyril in the wood as arranged. I told him what he had to do. He listened to me with a mixture of fear and admiration. Then he took me in his arms, but it was too late. I had to go back. I was surprised at how hard it was for me to part from him. If he had been seeking a means of binding me to him, he had certainly found it. My body responded to him, became fully itself, and blossomed when close to his. I kissed him passionately. I wanted to hurt him, to leave my mark on him so that he would not be able to forget me for one instant that evening and would dream of me that night. For the night would be endless without him close to me, without his lover's skill, his sudden passion, and his long caresses. That's all for now. Thank you.